Oh, hello. Live from the studio, I'm Jimmy Selesky. And last time we checked in on the political front, we discussed Donald Trump's conviction in the Manhattan courts prosecuted by District Attorney Alvin Bragg, heard by a jury of 12 of his peers, and overseen, of course, by Judge Juan Merchan, perhaps the most unbiased, neutral, impartial, and really unconflicted judge that has ever presided over a case ever, I think. I think you could certainly make that debate. I mean, the guy is just Lady Justice himself, just blindfolded. And Donald Trump was convicted on 34 counts of, what was it? Oh, yeah. Nothing. I think it was nothing. Was it nothing? Well, they said it was falsification of something or whatever, bookkeeping, fucking a porn star. But as I've distilled it more in my mind, I've realized, as have most Americans, that Donald Trump was convicted of being Donald Trump. I think what we found is that is the crime. That's been the crime the whole time. And this leads into the topic of the day, which is pre-programming. And this is a term that I have just began to love over the past week. I heard it first from none other than Alex Jones. And I got in a little trouble with the Budge last week. Budgie came on there and said, hey, watch what you say about Alex Jones. He was more right about things than you. And I was like, hey, you know me, dude. I constantly talk up Alex Jones on this show. I said that people are intimidated to go too far down the conspiracy rabbit hole with this whole Trump case and sound too much like an Alex Jones type guy. So they tend to kind of temper their predictions. And I guess in saying that, it sounded like I was saying that Alex Jones is this far-off extremist conspiracy guy who's just wacky. And I definitely don't think that. I think that Alex Jones is more on the nose than all the people that are pussyfooting around the issues right now because they don't want to. They're playing it safe. They're playing it safe. You know, the thing about being a political commentator is you don't want to hang your ass too far out to dry. You want to sit on the fence a little bit. If you go too far in one direction and you wind up being wrong, then it's humiliating. And that's kind of what Alex Jones went through with the Sandy Hook thing. Is he overcommitted to this very out there theory about a staged school shooting, and it wound up not being correct. Now, do I think he deserved to pay back the entire national debt of Greece for being wrong about Sandy Hook? No. But it definitely tainted his reputation because he, I guess, overcommitted to something that didn't pan out to be correct, as far as we know. So a lot of political commentators kind of dismiss the more quote-unquote conspiratorial ideas as a little out there. And the worst that happens if you wind up being wrong about that is you can just sit there and be like, look, man, I don't think anybody expected it to go that far. So, I was sitting here, I was saying this could happen, and then this wound up happening. Like, who could have predicted that? And you get to save your reputation. And that's a very safe way to play the game. You never put your neck out there. You never go too far down the line. And that's good for your career, but it's not good for the conversation because there's plenty of people that are just going to talk about the middle of the road possibilities that arise out of this. But what you find is that most of the most significant things that tend to come next in the playbook wind up being the most extreme, unexpected things. So I actually think it's probably a better idea. It's probably better for the conversation to discuss all possibilities of any level of possibility. Obviously, there are certain ones that you can kind of gloss over, like things that are just kind of out of our control. Technically, anything could happen, but in terms of like what happens next, this idea that you shouldn't entertain all possibilities, and I've noticed this because this all comes into pre-programming in two different ways. This is an example of pre-programming in two different ways. If you notice, I'm this show is based right in Baltimore, Maryland. Now, about 2 months ago, I want to say at this point, which is like, 14 years ago in internet years. But so 14 years ago in internet years / 2 months ago, the Key Bridge in Baltimore collapsed due to a gigantic cargo ship crashing into it. That ship is currently still in that waterway. The bridge is obviously still not cleaned up. This is an ongoing situation, and it's an ongoing investigation. But if you notice, the mayor of Baltimore City and the Baltimore County executive came out and spoke that night. And I don't exactly remember what Johnny O said, the county executive, but the mayor, Brandon Scott, within days of the crash, was chastising the quote-unquote conspiracy theorists, the people who think they're bridge engineers after having never taken, and I quote, taken a class in engineering. And it was immediately put out to the public that anybody saying that this was some type of orchestrated act of terrorism should be immediately cast aside as a crazy conspiracy theorist. From the jump, before we actually knew anything, it was already put in place that anybody who entertained that possibility on any level is not worthy of being listened to. Now, I'm not saying that this definitely was a terrorist attack, this Key Bridge thing. I'm not saying that. I wouldn't know. But that's the actual point. I wouldn't know other than what you tell me. And here's the other thing. Within hours of the collapse, who could honestly say they did know? Who could honestly, this bridge collapsed at 1:30 in the morning. The mayor spoke within hours of that to the news. And over the next 2 days, he was on multiple national news publications, including the Joy Reid Show on MSNBC, saying things that completely dismissed any type of speculation about the idea of this being more than just an accident. And so the takeaway from that, in my opinion, is this idea that we have discouraged a full conversation about the issue. We've discouraged it. They didn't know the answer. They had an idea of what happened, just like everyone else had an idea of what happened. If that's not the case, then why are they still looking into it? If they understood enough about the situation within hours of the bridge collapse, then it seems to me that the past 2 months of ongoing investigation into this matter would be rather redundant, right? Why are you looking into something when we already knew exactly what happened within hours of the crash? It was just an accident, FBI. Go home. What are you doing? Let's move on. Brandon Scott knew the answer within hours. What are you doing? No, for some odd reason, we're still looking into it. For some odd reason, our government still finds it necessary to investigate what happened, how it happened, and why it happened. I'm not saying that that is going to lead them to a conclusion that it was more than just a simple accident. What I am saying is I don't see any reason why that possibility should have been immediately taken off the table as soon as the event occurred. And the fact that it was put on perfect display, this pre-programming that I'd like to talk about today. You were pre-programmed in the aftermath of that bridge collapse to immediately discount any theory that wasn't an accident. Again, not because they knew it was an accident for certain and they knew it wasn't a planned thing for certain. They didn't know that. There's no way for them to have known that at that point. They still don't technically know that, as far as I'm aware. They just needed you to know that immediately. That's kind of where we're at right now. Whereas most people aren't going to go that far because it's easy to be a fence sitter. It's easy to just kind of hang at the 50-yard line, not go too far in either direction, kind of have a lenience and talk about it, but you're still following the script a little bit. Like you're still actually taking this Manhattan DA Trump case, Stormy Daniels thing, seriously to enough of a level where you're actually discussing illegality on a regular basis, until at a certain point you should just be like, look, this is actually bullshit. Like, I'm wasting my time and your time trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. The actual approach to this is to understand this is bullshit and not get bogged down in the pedantics, the nuance of this bullshit case. Similarly to how I think people are starting to realize how to handle the trans debate. We got so caught up in arguing things on a scientific level. Well, the chromosomes do this and blah, 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 that we didn't even realize, like, what am I doing? This is obviously not science. This is obviously not true. We all innately know that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and a man cannot be a woman. We all innately know that. It's just a matter of how polite you're willing to be. That's what it really comes down to. How polite are you? I, for one, am polite enough to address you as a she if you want to be addressed as a she, even if you and I both know you're a man. And I will refer to you as a woman, and I'm not going to make a thing about it and make you uncomfortable. I'm not going to do that. As long as you're not going to make me uncomfortable. If you, the second you start coming in with my pronouns are they, them, and this, that, the third, and you got to speak to me like this. No, now you've crossed the line into narcissism, self-indulgence, where, everyone who comes in contact with you on any level has to immediately learn your language and how to address you and change the entire way they see the world just to communicate with you. No, at that point, no. But if you want to conduct yourself in the confines of a normal societal interaction, that's fine. You want to be a she, you want to be a she. I don't support it being taught in schools. I don't support men in women's sports. I don't support any of that stuff. I don't. And like I said, nobody actually does. It just comes down to how polite they are or how scared they are to say that they don't actually believe that in their own personal life. What people mean when they say, I believe a man can be a woman, is I'm not going to tell a man who wants to be a woman that he's not a woman. They don't mean I believe a man is a woman. But the point I'm making with that is for a few years, when that thing really popped off, that issue, the late 2010s, when the trans thing was really the hot button issue, you had all these people coming out with like scientific arguments and studies that show that men are different than women. And it's like, okay, it's great to have that information out there, but at the end of the day, we just wasted 5 years reinventing the wheel. We already knew that men are men and women are women. We already knew that we're different, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, psychologically, everything. We already knew this, and we've known it for thousands of years. And we've wasted the past 5 years of what could have been a time of progress trying to just get back to where we already were in 2014, which is, okay, like, do what you want, dude, but, I still feel like I'm a guy. Like, that's where we already were. And that's what we're finally coming back to. People are starting to realize, like, dude, I'm not going to sit here and waste my time trying to come up with the perfect argument to explain to you that 2 + 2 = 4. 2 + 2 = 4. We already know this. I'd like to discuss a math problem that we don't know. We're wasting our time. And that's all this is. This Trump shit, the convictions, wasting all your time arguing the legal ins and outs of this, that, the third. It's all like a computer virus. That's what it is. It's a computer virus. One of the easiest ways to understand a computer virus is really understanding a virus in and of itself. A virus needs a host. A virus is not technically alive. That's why antibiotics don't work on it. A virus is essentially a bundle of coding proteins that once are able to invade a living cell in a living thing, an organism, it can then hijack the cell's processor, or whatever you want to call it, and replicate itself and spread to more cells. So what happens is the virus gets into a living thing and then forces that living thing to repeat a task over and over and over again that only benefits the virus. And that's what you see when you see all these stupid fucking conversations that are floating around our society. Is that much like a computer that's been slowed down by a virus, you have been slowed down by constantly feeling the need to repeat your arguments as to why a man is a man and why a woman is a woman, even though that's already a thing we all know. You're being forced to over and over again justify how January 6th, the only unarmed insurrection we've ever seen in the world, was not an insurrection. It was a fucking riot at worst. That was probably obviously instigated. There were obviously people there. They obviously set it up in a way that it could maximize the effect. And immediately within hours, it was already branded as an insurrection. It was already in place. We know this rally is going to be there. We're going to have people instigate and try to get them to escalate it and try to invade the Capitol building so we can create a narrative of insurrection. And then, oh my God, how convenient. We have an insurrection act. And now we can use this to prosecute Donald Trump and potentially disqualify him from the next election. Which is obviously what they've been trying to do for the past 3 years because they're currently about to put him in jail. So clearly that was always the playbook all along. And you over and over again are sitting there arguing, why? Dude, really? January 6th? Like, I get it. It wasn't the greatest look in the world, but come on, the worst day in America since September 11th? No, nobody believes that's true. But that's the virus. Because instead of actually looking at what's going on right in front of your fucking face, you're sitting here being programmed by this thought virus to argue their nonsensical arguments over and over and over again. So I don't feel like arguing their arguments. I don't feel like talking about whether or not Trump is actually guilty. He's obviously not, okay? If you can't see that, you're too far infected. You're a fucking daywalker at this point. There's nothing I can do. If you can't see what's going on right in front of your eyes with everything, there is little hope for you at this point because they can't make it much more clear. Many will look, few will see. Many will listen, few will hear. I said that. Don't look it up. So instead of playing it safe, and talking about the poll numbers. Oh, this conviction could really, it could hurt Trump in the polls. But oh, wait, would you look at this? It appears that Trump has gone up 6 points in the polls since we fucking know, dude. Do you think there's a single Trump supporter in the country that is less behind Trump now that he was convicted of this retarded fucking thing? Find me that guy. Get me the CIA to find me the one guy in the country that went, man, I was behind Trump until they convicted him of this porn star thing that nobody believes. Who is that? Nobody. But yet all your political pundits are on there wasting your fucking time telling you shit we already know. Why don't we tell you shit that we haven't talked about yet? Which is the pre-programming. The same fucking way. The same way that as soon as that bridge collapsed in Baltimore, you were programmed to not even consider it being anything other than an accident. Why? We don't know. They didn't know what it was at the time. All they knew is you know it's an accident. We don't know it's an accident, but you fucking do, and you better not ask any questions. And the narrative was out there from the jump with this Trump case. And what pisses me off is the Republican, the right-wing guys were floating it too as a possibility. Well, we still don't know how this conviction is going to affect Trump in the polls. Yeah, you do, asshole. Why don't you stick your neck out for once and say what everyone knows instead of sitting in the middle, because that's the easy way out. That's the easy thing to do. It's always the stuff that seemingly comes out of left field, not because it came out of left field, but because you've been programmed to not even entertain them. So what's the pre-programming going on? Aside from the fact that it was already put into the public conversation, much like the whole suburban housewives thing. And, now all of a sudden they have this narrative set so that when the election goes one way or the other, people go, well, those suburban houses. Who the fuck are the suburban housewives? I met plenty of them. I play goddamn music for a living at Valley Inn. I know plenty of suburban housewives. They go one way or the other, just like every other fucking person on the planet. But these are the narratives set in place. Oh, it's going to hurt Trump in the polls if he's convicted. Well, it didn't. So that didn't pan out. And here's the important part about understanding pre-programming, because we already discussed what it is. But now let's discuss why it is. Not just to slow down your processor, not just to distract you from actual meaningful conversation or thinking, but also because what it's doing in that process is opening your mind up to possibilities that now seem like the most likely only because it's what they've been telling you are the most likely things. So that when these things that are actually unexpected happen, you've been pre-programmed to expect them versus the things that are actually expected that you've been pre-programmed to not expect. So putting a former president in jail a couple months before an election in the most ridiculous sham of a trial this country has ever seen is technically actually a very unexpected thing. It's not something that's normal. But because of the past 9 years of programming, of being told that this guy is the most criminal, corrupt, danger to democracy this country, the world has ever seen, all of a sudden, Trump being put in jail, which will likely be the outcome of this, I can almost guarantee it, on July 11th when they sentence him. I don't see why they wouldn't sentence him to jail. What a waste of a show trial. No, when they finally do put him in jail, it doesn't strike you as that crazy. Because, well, we've been talking about for 9 years how nuts this guy is and how much of a danger he is. And so now you literally expect the unexpected. The unexpected being the ridiculous obviously corrupt shit they're doing, they've made you come to expect by giving you a false narrative. So now the fact that the Biden administration is imprisoning their political opponents doesn't quite strike you as that odd, because you've been programmed to think that this is a natural next step based off of everything you've been told in the past. And all the obvious next steps that would arise from this don't even occur to you because nobody wants you to think about those things. So the obvious next steps, not the polls and how they're going to be affected by this. No, the obvious next step is they have still not succeeded in eliminating Donald Trump from the election. Even after putting him in jail, they will still not have succeeded in eliminating Donald Trump from the election. So in case you're naive enough or programmed enough to think that this is the end-all be-all of their master plan. Hey, man, look, we wanted to put him in jail. We put him in jail. Whatever comes next, who cares? Our job is done. You know, the obviously conflicted judge, DA, the Biden administration themselves, the Democratic Party, all these people orchestrating this kangaroo court, this conviction, they're not done. They're not done until Donald Trump is officially not president again. And what really made me want to talk about this topic in particular is this video on Twitter I saw last night.
I am going to spend some time with the criminal justice system, with the justice system, asking them, tell us what's going on with the domestic terrorists. Are they preparing a civil war against us? Should we be concerned about our safety? What is he doing with this divisive language? It is dangerous, and we're going to have to make sure that we understand that we're not at risk with this man talking in the way that he's doing.
All right, so that was Representative from California, Maxine Waters, perhaps one of the lowest IQ people I've ever seen, not just in politics, just in general. And that's her on, I guess it looked like the Al Sharpton. I saw him there in that split screen. So some show on legacy media, and Maxine Waters is on there. She's talking about the potential threat of domestic terrorism as a result of this Trump case. And this really, I don't know if she meant to do this. In fact, I'm sure she didn't. But this made me kind of wake up to what I see as an obvious next step. And to me, the obvious next step can be found by looking at all the other pieces that have been put in play. Look at the state of our country right now, and let's start here with Maxine Waters. You have this large web of false narratives that all justify the next step of the narrative. That's what this is. The first false narrative, of course, is that Trump is a white supremacist. He just is. He's a racist, rapist, corrupt, any other bad thing you can throw at him, he's that, all the way down to the word orange and little hands or whatever you want to throw. But in the context of this conversation, Trump is a white supremacist. Therefore, Trump supporters are white supremacists. Also, white supremacists are the number one domestic threat to our national security, as you've heard repeated over and over and over again for the past however many years. And now you see where we're at. If white supremacists are the number one threat to our domestic security, and Trump supporters are white supremacists because Trump is a white supremacist, then by effect, Trump and his supporters are the number one domestic threat to our national security. And this is already implanted in your head. And it's been reaffirmed by incidents like January 6th that has been planted in your head as this dark point, this horrendously low, shameful point in American history, rivaled by few other events since the dawn of this country, where Trump incited an attempted overthrow of this government to install himself. Again, we still don't know what the plan was. We don't know how it was orchestrated. And even more so, if it was orchestrated, it was the worst plan ever because I don't understand what the plan was. We're not going to have any guns. We're just going to dress up in silly costumes and American flag capes and Viking hats and whatever. And then we're just going to run into the Capitol building and wander around so hard that the government will just be placed in the hands of Trump forever. That's the plan, guys. And everybody was like, I don't see how that's going to work, but sure, fuck it, let's do it. So now you see how, again, each step of the way, more and more of these false narratives tie in to create this gigantic web of lies. So we have this narrative that white supremacists, aka Trump supporters, are the number one domestic threat to our national security. And we've seen examples of this through such horrific things like January 6th and other assorted events, where Trump has proven time and time again that he will stop at nothing to get back into the halls of power. And he's done so by questioning a free and fair election. And he has 93 felony counts spanning from sexual assault to mishandling of classified documents to illegal campaign finances to this, to that, to boom, boom, bang, bang, bang. And everything's falling into place where you're like, okay, so we have this guy who's running for president, who is a threat to our democracy, who will not accept the results of the 2020 election, who tried to incite an insurrection on January 6th, who is a white supremacist, who is guilty of countless crimes, who is in jail, and whose supporters are also white supremacists and therefore the number one threat to our domestic security. And what do you think happens next, folks? Because on the Friday show, I speculated that they might assassinate him in jail. And then I thought, you know what? That's way too old school. That's too JFK. That's too Epstein. And you can't do that with a guy like Trump and pull it off. Look, you can, and they would if they could, believe me. You see what they're doing, all this stuff right now? If they believed they could assassinate Trump to just get it over with and they could get away with it, they would have done it like yesterday. And by yesterday, I mean like years ago. It would never have gotten this far if they thought that that was an option. So while I still have that on the table, because again, I don't know how smart these people are. That's the other thing. You always make the mistake that these people are like evil geniuses. And perhaps the people that are actually pulling the strings, the people that own politicians like Maxine Waters and all these useful idiots that go out and just regurgitate whatever thing, they're told to regurgitate. Yeah, those people are idiots, but the people that are controlling them, how competent are they? I don't know. We don't know. Because it doesn't appear like everything they do goes to plan. I think they underestimate the public and think that they can get away with more than they actually can. Assassinating Trump to eliminate him from contention. Again, that's an old school. That's an Abraham Lincoln, JFK style thing. This is 2024. We have social media at our disposal. We have levels of access to information and therefore not just the spreading of true information at our disposal, but the spreading of false information, the spreading of propaganda exists today in levels that could only have been dreamed of by authoritarian, tyrannical leaders of the past. It is unrivaled by any other point in history, and it's not even close. So we don't even need to take these risky, big steps like just eliminating a political opponent blatantly in broad daylight in front of everyone, right in front of their faces, and hope that they don't get too pissed off about it. They don't have to do that. They don't have to do that. They've already set in place so many pieces to the puzzle that, again, if you're paying attention, it's almost easy to see where this is going to go. Because we've talked about, look, I flirt with this every time I come on the show, and it's no secret my feelings about the 2020 election, that I do believe it was stolen in one way or the other. I couldn't tell you exactly how. I just know something doesn't seem right, and there's no other thing that I've witnessed in politics over the past 9 years that gives me any confidence that this is the one thing that wasn't fucked with, that wasn't rigged, where the narrative is completely honest and true. I'd like to be able to believe that. I just don't see why I should. You haven't really given me much to work with. But even that, we discussed on previous episodes, in order to cheat something, in order to steal something like that, in order to steal an election, it still needs to be within reach. If it comes down to a couple thousand votes in a couple counties to put the state over the line, to get the electoral votes needed to win the election, then sure, you can pull that off. But when it gets to the point where every swing state is leaning Trump in large margins, and even continuing to increase after these criminal convictions, and likely even more so when he's almost certainly sentenced to jail in July, it becomes too wide of a margin even to cheat, because there would be no way to do it without getting caught. The level of cheating, the scale of fraud would have to be so magnificent that it would be impossible to cover up. Unless you can create a strong enough narrative where people will believe it's possible. The ultimate goal of a lie is not to get you to accept it as true. It is to get you to accept that it could be true. Because once you've accepted that it could be true, you begin to doubt what is true. And then you're anybody's dog for a bone. And so if they are attempting in one way or another to steal the 2024 election, they have to come up with a narrative that you will believe could be true. The same way they did in 2020, where this election that didn't make sense, an outcome that didn't make sense to anyone, has been virtually accepted at this point because the narrative was strong enough to make you believe that it was possible, even though the narrative itself was built on a house of cards of lies, justifying each step of the way so that you got to the end point and you were like, well, I mean, this other bullshit happened, so I guess this bullshit happened too, whatever. And this is where the pre-programming comes in. Because in 2020, the pre-programmed narrative was when all these states that Trump had been winning for the past several hours miraculously flip overnight in favor of Biden in order to secure him the election. We have an established narrative in place that makes it believable. And the established narrative, that sequence of falsities that creates a giant web of lies that infects your brain and bogs you down from seeing the obvious truth, could be distilled down to, among many things, because there's a lot that went into play into creating that narrative that Trump, even though he gained support from the 2016 election going into 2020, he gained votes. Outside of Biden, who got 81 million votes apparently, Trump also had the most votes of any presidential candidate in history, all the while appealing to Trump supporters who are apparently this reactionary, extremist fringe group that also seems to represent half of the voting population. This fringe minority of people that represent half of the voting public. So that doesn't make any sense. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to make sense. Trump supporters are a fringe minority. But he got more votes than any other presidential candidate in history, other than apparently Joe Biden that same election year. He also gained support, but the narrative by accusing him of this thing and dividing the country socially and making him the most polarizing figure in global politics allows for people to believe that maybe he was just so divisive. Even if the country was doing well, you still can't ignore that the country's never been more divided. And so, yeah, maybe a lot of people voted for him, but even more people voted against him because they just hated Trump that much that they voted for Biden. Because you can't sell the narrative that people were enthusiastic about Biden. Nobody's going to believe that. But you can sell the narrative that enough people hated Trump that they were willing to go out and vote for Biden just because he wasn't Trump. You can sell that narrative. And you can sell that narrative because you've created an unprecedented level of division in recent history by misleading the public as to who and what Trump is and who his supporters are. And then you have a global pandemic like COVID that began in February of the 2020 election year, resulting in the shutting down of not just the United States, but most countries across the world. And even come November, it forced several states to violate their own state election laws and their own constitutions to institute unprecedented and literally illegal levels of mail-in balloting. But hey, it's COVID. We've never been in a situation like this, so these are just the things you got to do. You got to violate state election laws and constitutions and have these mail-in ballots because it's COVID. And you know, obviously Democrats take COVID more seriously than Republicans, so you know we're kind of expecting that Biden's going to have a massive advantage in the mail-in ballots. Because the Democrats are going to be the ones that aren't going to want to go to the polls. They're going to be the ones that are going to want to mail in their ballots. So you have all these pre-programmed ideas in your head. Well, you know, the country is doing great, but we are divided. And while there aren't a lot of people that like Biden, there are certainly a lot of people that don't like Trump. And they might be willing to vote for Biden just because they don't like Trump. And it is a pandemic right now, so there's going to be a lot of mail-in balloting. And you know most of the mail-in ballots are going to be Democrats, Biden votes. And then the day of, Trump is winning most of the swing states going into like the end of the day. And miraculously overnight, all those states flip from what? Mail-in ballots. And wouldn't you know it, everybody wakes up like, what? I woke up like, what? What the hell just happened? Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Georgia? They all flipped? Overnight. And immediately all that pre-programming comes into effect. And they can spin the narrative. Well, you know, those votes were mail-in ballots. And remember, we were saying that most of the mail-in ballots are going to be Democrats. There's going to be a lot of mail-in ballots because it's COVID. And you go, I mean, we have been saying that for months. Yeah, I guess that is something I should have expected. That's the pre-programming. So what's the pre-programming now? Going into 2024. They can't rerun COVID again. You know, that's played out. That's old hack shit. But they have been putting into place and working a narrative for years, like we discussed, that Trump supporters are a threat to national security, and they've finally managed to get a rigged enough trial to convict Trump, and come July, they will, in all likelihood, sentence him to prison, where again, he will not technically be eliminated from the election. But, like Maxine Waters says, should we be looking in to these white supremacist groups? Because where we are right now, I'm starting to wonder if maybe Trump's divisive language and this trial could be leading to rising levels of national security threats. Because you know how white supremacy and Trump supporters are the number one domestic terror threat, and we just put their guy in jail. And so is it possible we might start seeing uprisings and terrorist attacks in support of Trump in revolt to this legal proceeding against our justice system? Well, Maxine Waters, I'd say it's very possible. I'd say it's almost too possible and awfully convenient that we have all the pieces in play to create a narrative that the criminally corrupt Donald Trump has been put in jail and his supporters are violently revolting. Which has now officially made Trump into a legitimate national security threat. His supporters are domestic terrorists on a mass scale. And there's just no way we can allow him to fall into a position of power. How could we possibly allow for the leader of a domestic terrorist organization to win the presidential election? We simply cannot. There must be some constitutional protection. And I don't know what that is. I don't know how they would do that. Because, yeah, they were able to convict him of this stupid Stormy Daniels shit with a corrupt DA and judge and state court and whatever. But once you start getting into the higher levels of the system, it's going to be really difficult to get the Supreme Court to run a show trial and come to a foregone decision of eliminating him. That's not going to happen. So I think they've gotten almost as far as they can get with the justice system by convicting him and putting him in jail in July, very likely. But even then, the narrative that Trump is going to lose because he's now running from jail is probably not going to fly, because he's only gaining support as a result of this. I tell you what will happen. This is used as a very convenient excuse for Biden not to have to participate in the debates. Biden comes out after avoiding answering whether he's going to debate for like his entire presidency, comes out in an edited video where every other sentence is clipped together because he can't make it through a sentence without editing it or whatever and scripting it. And so he goes, hey, come on, man, we're going to debate. I beat you twice in 2020. I hear you're free on Wednesdays, or whatever the fuck he says. And so he puts out that video being like, see, Biden wants to debate, but oh man, look, Trump's in jail now. How is he going to debate? So, okay, great. So the fact that Trump's in jail now gives Biden an excuse to not have to debate. That's in the cards. But outside of that, it's still not going to be enough of a selling point to the public that Trump lost all this support because he was put in jail. Most of the public is going to support him more. So the next logical step, in my opinion, would be to, in one way or another, create a narrative that Trump supporters are becoming an increasing threat to the security of this country and that they are acting out now that Trump's been put in jail. I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know if they're going to do that by literally staging false flag events which again is not going to be the first time that's happened. Just please look into anything. This is not unprecedented. Any of the things we're talking about are not unprecedented. Again, the pre-programming is that when people use words like false flag, conspiracy, any terms like that have been connotated in modern culture to be associated with crazy people. And so the second you hear them, you think lunatic. You saw it happen in COVID when people say natural immunity or ivermectin. Your just brain is just programmed. Nope. False flag. So accepting and acknowledging that the CIA has certainly staged false flag events to justify other things that our government has done in the past, to justify global conflicts, to overthrow people in power in other countries and install people that are going to work with us instead in our corporations and our businesses. This is all stuff that is documented, that is open information, that you can look into. None of this is crazy, unprecedented stuff. So I don't know if they're going to literally stage false flag events and blame it on Trump supporters. Or they play the January 6th playbook, or what I believe to be the playbook by all available evidence, which is to set up, lay the stage, lay the foundation, and light the match for Trump supporter related acts of violence and terrorism or whatever. That would be going to the rallies that inevitably are going to occur when Donald Trump is put in jail and inciting violence, instigating them, having low levels of security like January 6th so that they can't contend with the crowds, so that the event becomes worse than it had to be. I don't know. I really don't know. But that playbook has already been put into play with January 6th, so I don't know if they could pull even that off again and still sell it the same way, by saying that some vague thing that Trump said was actually him telling them to do what they did and then try to blame it on him and get him on something. I don't know if they can run that again because it didn't work the first time. So they may even have to go so far as to literally just stage things. I don't know. It's hard to imagine that they'd be willing to stoop that low. I think more than likely they're going to try to get Trump supporters to descend into violence. They're going to antagonize, they're going to instigate, they are going to put the pieces in play to maximize the damage when violence does erupt. They are going to take that and run with it so that they can further the narrative that Trump supporters are a violent domestic terror threat to this country. And even if they're unsuccessful in linking that to Trump directly in a way that disqualifies him from the election, that would be getting you to believe the lie. But the end goal here is to get you to believe that the lie could possibly be true. Not necessarily accept it, but just accept that it could be true. And that, in this context, would be saying, look, yeah, people did support Trump. But then once he got put in jail, all of a sudden you have all these Trump supporters across the country violently reacting, people dead, attacking police, destroying property, all the things that they said they're against. And look at them now. And people in the country saw that and said, I can't support a guy like this anymore. So yeah, people were fed up with Biden for sure. But when they saw that side of Trump and his supporters, it scared them away from the polls. And ipso facto, abracadabra, alakazam, you may have possibly succeeded in getting a large enough portion of the public to believe that narrative if you'd pull it off well enough. You may have succeeded in getting them to believe that Trump lost support as a result of the acts of violence that were perpetrated by his supporters in protest of his conviction and imprisonment. And I believe that is the most likely play. And the reason I say this is not to set myself up for an opportunity to say, I told you so, when this ultimately does happen. But I say this to warn people to not be incited to violence when this inevitably goes down. When Trump is put in jail, there will be demonstrations, massive demonstrations. And the opposition will want nothing more from you than to tarnish your image. They will want nothing more from you than to act violently, to act like a threat. And if you do, you will have given them control of the narrative. So it is important that we understand their game plan so as to not play into it. We'll talk later about the other possible directions they could move from here. But in my opinion, Maxine Waters just let the cat out of the bag. This is already in the talking rooms. This is already being laid out. This is already where they want to go with this. It makes more sense than anything I've heard so far. And it's just crazy enough to work if you're stupid enough to fall for it. Live from the studio, I'm Jimmy Selesky. Hit the subscribe button, leave us a like, leave us a comment. Tell me what you think. You know, I'd love to hear it. Till next time, peace.